Hello everyone, welcome to the first session of SAP Basis Training. In this particular session, we will be discussing about architecture of SAP Netweaver application server. We have briefly seen what we are going to discuss about the architecture in this particular session in our previous course, that is a prerequisites course, which is Netweaver fundamentals. However, we can consider this as a recap for the previous course and we will see a little more detail in the topics. In basis also we will cover many of the topics and we will see more detail what we have seen in our fundamentals. It is very important as a basis consultant, you need to understand the underlying technology in SAP systems. As we've seen previously, SAP is a three-tier architecture and it also a client-server architectures. So what is mean by three-tier architecture? SAP R3. The R3 represents that it has three different layers, three tiers. The first one is we call this presentation layer, an application layer, and database layer. Here we say, okay, client tier and application tier or database tier. What is client tier? Client tier, where is a presentation where you can use the SAP or how SAP is presented to the end user. Or let's say SAP GUI. The SAP GUI which we have used is a client tier. It's a client software. So end user who can execute the transactions or retrieve the data from SAP using this client tier. One example is SAP GUI. Then we have Web GUI. Web GUI is, there is nothing but the same SAP GUI. We can call the SAP GUI from a web browser. It's quite simple as that. You also have SAP GUI for Java. It looks like web, but Web GUI is like we can enable web-enabled services in your SAP system. Then you should be able to call the SAP GUI using an Internet Explorer or any other browser. So that is Web GUI. So the SAP server itself have this functionality in the latest systems. That's what we have seen. We have used to have this ITS servers before to enable web service in SAP. Nowadays we don't need that. We can simply enable this Web GUI in your SAP system. Then using your Internet Explorer, you just simply type in the full address of your SAP server as well as the link which enables or which you will get generally when you enable the Web GUI. Then you have a total link. Then use the link and you will get a similar to SAP GUI and just simply you can log in. So that is Web GUI. Then RFCs, which we have seen before, remote function call. Remote function call here, let's say we use it in client tier, means as you know, remote function call can be used from one SAP server to another SAP server. It could be two different SAP server where you connect using remote function call. Here it could be a different client, or let's say a Microsoft server which will support remote function call, or any other third-party server which can call or which can use the RFC function to call data from the SAP system. So we consider this as a client tier. So there's using the remote function call functionality in SAP, the specific client, or it could be application, or it could be a software, or for example it could be a Microsoft Excel program, VBA program, which can also use RFC function, remote function call, to call an SAP server. They also have some functionality where you can connect your SAP server to your Microsoft Excel. That could be a example here. There is many other applications which, if you get into more detail into SAP systems or in the SAP field, you can see quite a lot of applications here. Then HTML client or SOAP client. Let's say you have an application. This application is let's say NWBC. NWBC is same like Web GUI. It's a software which you need to install in your PC. So this also a HTML client and web service client. Like this, you have quite a lot of client tier applications which can be used as a client for a SAP system. Then we come to application layer. What is application layer? Application layer is the place where your actual SAP system sits. As you know, SAP is mainly have program as well as tables where these programs are saved, or let's say where this program is being executed. The programs will be executed in the application server. Okay, that is an application tier. There could be many application server. You have central instance and application instance. Central instance also serves as an application server when you are executing some program. The central instance also have the dialog instance as well as the background instance and so on. So it also like an application server. So this is called the application layer where the SAP application is running. Okay, very simple. So this is called application layer. Then the database layer where we can have any database, or let's say different database. You can have MS SQL, or you can have Oracle, or you can also have HANA. Oracle used to be the famous database for SAP. Nowadays SAP is promoting its own database, which is HANA, and there is a database called SAP DB, which is not quite widely used. If you are using a small system, you can also still use SAP DB. You can use DB2, Informix, many databases which have been supported by SAP. However, in the newer trend, SAP use HANA or SAP promote HANA. However, you will see a wide range of customers in SAP is using Oracle as their database, because older days it was like that. And you know, as a database administrator, many people are well aware of Oracle, and Oracle is very stable software. So you can also see quite a lot of users or quite a lot of companies using Oracle as their database. Now let's see what is client server. To understand the client server technology, it's quite simple. We need to have one server which provide the resources to the clients. The clients could be multiple clients where it could centrally execute a specific process. So the server which provides the resources or which holds all the data and process this request is called server, and the PCs or the users who is requesting for this information or requesting for the resources called client. So here we have client, and all this together it's called your server. The client server architecture we could classify into two major ways. Let's say hardware based and the software based. In terms of hardware based, it's separated by hardware, similar to what we have done here in the SAP systems. However, if let's say in the software based, we can take an example of web application servers where the specific software component will act as a server, and the same time you will have another component which will act as a client. So you will have a client software and you will also have a server software. It could be also possible that the clients and the server software is in one specific box, or let's say box, I mean a specific hardware, where the client software also required for the server in order to execute some specific applications. Let's say if you work in some system administration field, you may know all this concept. Like in Oracle also you have listeners, which is also a client, and so forth. So the difference between client and server in hardware base and software base is hardware is separated by hardware, and software based client server architecture is separated by the component of the software which providing the specific services. Three-tier architecture in SAP, which we have already seen in our previous course. We have SAP system have a three-tier architecture where the presentation layer, that is the SAP GUI, that is our presentation tier, or the client tier, same like what we seen in our previous session. In general, it could be like a SAP GUI in your Windows based systems, and then you have applications layer. Application layer is your SAP instance where you have dialog instance, background instance, and your update and spool and the enqueue instances, where you will get the request from the SAP GUI, from the end user, then it will be processed in the application layer. The application layer servers based on Windows server or a Unix server. So this is where the SAP actual software is lying here. Then you have the third layer, which is called your database layer. The database layer also could be in Windows or Unix systems. However, SAP support different databases like Oracle, Informix, DB, MS SQL Server, or MaxDB also been supported. However, the latest database which is being presently in the market is HANA database, which is SAP own database. HANA database is quite different than all other databases. It's quite interesting. It's basically an in-memory data processing, which will be much faster than any of this database. Next, let us discuss about SAP instances. What is an SAP instance? Here you could see that we have database layer and application layer. If you should have seen, when we log into our SAP system, then we log in to one SID, one specific XID called ECC. This specific SID, the ECC, have database layer as well as the application layer. So database layer will have an SID. Generally it's the same SID, like let's say if the SID of the application layer is ECC, then the SID of the database instance, it's also a similar one. So we have one instance for database in the database layer. Let's, for example, take Oracle, then you will have an Oracle instance as ECC. Then we come to application layer. In the application layer, you can see different hosts. In the host A, you can see central instance. The central instance is the one where you have the message server. The message server, which generally controls the entire system, means that the central instance message server is the one who receives all the requests and distribute to different dialog instances using the dispatcher. This we have seen in our previous session. However, let's see it more detail. You can see in the host A, you can see central instance 00, and you can also see a dialog instance 01. What is the difference between central instance and dialog instance? In the central instance, you have a additional service which is called the message server, which will control all the dispatches of each dialog instances. The central instance also we can consider is a dispatcher, which also have the dialog instances where you can process the request also in the central instance. Each instance will have its own instance number. You can see here it is 00, and you have 01. Then you have another host which will have only one dialog instance, which is 02. Then you can see a host 3 which have two dialog instance. Now you can think why the host B have one dialog instance and why the host C have two dialog instance. This is depending on the hardware capacity of each host. For example, possible this host B, the hardware capacity is quite less. That's the reason we hosted one dialog instance here. And the host C, the hardware capacity could be quite high. That's the reason you could hold two dialog instances. So all together you will have one SID. So this SID have many instances. Okay, all you can collect it together, then it will be one SID. Let's say ECC system can have multiple server instances. This will allow you to increase the load balancing of the SAP systems. That's an interesting part in SAP. Let's say after you implement SAP system, you have three different hosts where you have almost 5 instances running. Whereas you found out that you want to increase the capacity of your SAP system, you can add additional host and you can add it in the same SID, then it will come to this resource pools. Like this, you can increase the capacity of your SAP system. The processing capacity of your SAP system could be increased. very easily in your SAP application layer. Maybe we could go to the next slide and see more detail about SAP instance. Here you could see in more detail that you can see in the central instance what we have is the message server. Also in the central instance you will see the NQ work process. NQ work process, as we see in this, is used for your lock mechanism. The lock mechanism cannot be more than one. It has to be locked centrally. So in the central instance you have the NQ work process as well. Okay, in the dialog instance, again, it depends on how do you want to manage it. You can have only the dialog instance, or you can also have the background process. In the dialog instance, it's again depends how you wanted to configure, because you can also have only dialog work process, or you can also keep only the background work process. It depends how we are going to design the SAP systems. So all together, which will be called one SAP system, which will have different instances. Okay, the instance means collection of resource. It could be the work process which could be used to process any of the SAP request. Now let us look into SAP ABAP processes. This we have seen also very well detailed in our previous course. First, let us see what is message server. So message server, which we have seen in our previous slide, that message server is placed in the central instance, which in turn communicate to each dispatcher. So each dispatcher will dispatch the request to the specific work process. So message server is the central control of each dispatcher. So each dispatcher will control its work process. So let's go back. So the message server is connected to each dispatcher of the application server, which includes the central instance also. Then we come to gateways. Gateways means the gateway is like a kind of router where you can connect, or where you can route your SAP system. So gateway server, gateway service is basically in default, which will be available in each SAP system. However, you can also keep a gateway as a separate server, where you can connect all the SAP system to the gateway server. So the external request first will be sent to the gateway server, then will be sent to the respective SAP system. Then we have internet communication server, that is ICM. ICM generally controls the web requests. So also we have seen. Then we have ABAP dispatcher, where the ABAP dispatcher is the one who controls all the work processes. Work process is dialog work process. Dialog work process used to process the dialog request which is requested by the users. Then we have background work process. Background work process is used to process the background jobs, or the jobs which are scheduled in background by the users. Then the lock management we have seen already. Lock management or NQ management, where whenever you update any data or any record in the SAP system, this needs to be logged so that another user will not update or edit this specific record. So the lock management is called NQ work process, which is represented E, dialog work process D, background work process B. Then we have update work process, which is V. This is to update the changes in your database. Then we have spool work process. Spool work process is specially used for your print management. So it generally executes the sequential execution of your print request to the printer. So whenever you create any print request, this will be converted into spools. So each spool will have its own numbers. The spool work process will execute the request in sequence. Whenever you create any print request, the print request will be converted as a spool request. The spool will have the detail of the print information, it also has a specific number. Then the spool request will be sent to the specific printer for the printing. This will be carried out by the spool work process. So all this work process, D, B, E, V, and S, will be managed by the dispatcher or will be controlled by the dispatcher. The dispatcher will be connected to the message server. Message server is the controlling process of all the work process, all the works which has happened to your SAP system. Next, let us discuss about Java work process, that is application server Java process. In application server Java process, you will also see the similar way of how it is working in ABAP work process. You can see dispatcher. Basically, the dispatcher distributes the incoming request to the server processes. You can see here, you can see only one server process. Server process generally can execute large number of requests in parallel. That is, every server process is called multi-threaded processes. So it can execute more than one request, a large number of requests in parallel. So the dispatcher can have maximum of 16 server process in one dispatcher. However, minimum you should have one server process per dispatcher. So the message server, Java message service, means that which provides or which will act like a distribution for the dispatcher. You can see in this diagram, the message server is connected to the dispatcher, then the dispatcher is connected to the server processes. And you can also see the enqueue process here, enqueue services. Yes, it's similar to ABAP. So all the logical logs will be executed by the enqueue services. You could also see SDM, that is Software Development Manager. The Software Development Manager is basically a standard tool which is provided by SAP to install Java software components in the SAP Web Application Server Java. Now in this particular slide, you can see application server ABAP architecture altogether. Here you can see we have a central instance as well as a dialog instance. The difference between the central instance and dialog instance, where you can see a ABAP message server, also you can see the enqueue server. Okay, the enqueue server is not available in dialog server. You can see dialog and the enqueue work process. The enqueue work process is not available in the dialog instance. You can see other work processes like dialog, update, background, as well as spool work process in your dialog instance. However, the enqueue work process and ABAP message server is only available in the central instance. On top of it, we also see the gateway instance. The gateway instance, as I said, the gateway could be a separate system or it could be a part of your existing system. And you can see ICM. Now you may think how the ICM is going to work in terms of whether the specific request should be executed by ABAP or Java. In general, all the web requests will come to ICM. The ICM will identify the particular web request needs to be processed by a Java dispatcher or ABAP dispatcher. So based on that, ICM will forward the request to specific dispatcher. Okay, that's the way it works. You can see message server is also connected to the dispatcher of the dialog instance. In general, there is a user request comes. This will be processed by the dispatcher, or that means it will allow a specific work process. However, the dispatcher, all the dispatcher is controlled by the ABAP message server. So let us log into our SAP system, have a quick look how this looks like in our SAP system. So this is our ECC system. We also seen the system previously, just have a recap. So now we have logged into our SAP system. Let's go to the transaction SM51, or you can also call the transaction from the menu path. If you go to tools, administration, then you go to monitor, then you open the system monitor. Here you can see SM51. Simply double click here. So this particular transaction will give you how many number of servers are present in this specific system. System means SID. SID of this particular system is ECC. In this particular SAP system, how many servers are there? Either it could be central instance or it can be applications instance. As we seen, you will have one central instance, you will have multiple application instance. However, in this particular system, we have only one central instance. We don't have any application instance because this is just used for demo purpose. We don't have so many users. Basically, there is nothing been done. We just use it for our training purpose. So we have only one central instance. So here you can see the server name. Server name is like starting with host name. Host name for this particular machine is ECC demo, that you can see it here. This is the host name. So this is a host name and the server name. Then you have SID, then the instance number. This 00 is the instance number which we are using. And you can see the message type. Here you can see what are all the kind of services running in this particular system. You can see dialog, batch, update, update to, spool, NQ, ICM, and J2E is all running. The status is active. If it is an application server, then you don't find the NQ work process here. That's everything you will find it in the server. However, depending on what are all the work process you are using in the application server. Okay, right now you can see here we have dialog work process, update work process, we have NQ work process, and 3 background work process and 1 spool work process are there. Okay, let's go back to our presentation. One thing we need to remember here, we said the message server is the one who distribute the work to all the instances. However, if you can see in this diagram, it says SAP GUI, the arrow mark directly come to the dispatcher. Why it is like this? Because you can also directly log into one specific instance by directly logging into that instance without using the load balancing. So in order to use load balancing, then you need to do some configuration in our SAP system that is actually part of our basis. We will come to that later. So once you do the configuration, then the load balancing will be done by the message server. So as soon as you log in using SAP GUI, then it will take you to the message server. The message server will allocate a specific instance for you. Then the dispatcher will take over and allocate the specific work process, whether it is dialog or backgrounds or the spool work process, depending on your request. So it is also possible you can directly log in. In our case, when we configure this ECC system in the initial stage, if we should have seen that we used the direct IP address, but we did not use the group. Let's say if I go to the SAP GUI configuration, if we go here, you can see, go to the change mode. You can see we are using custom application server. That means connection type is custom application server. That means we are directly logging into the application server. This is IP address, this is the instance number, and this is the system ID. If you use the group, then we don't do that. If you see here, you use the system ID, then you will specify the message server. What is the message server? That generally your CI. Then if you have router, then you will specify the router. Then you will simply log into that one. So that right now we are not using that. We are directly logging into the application server. That we need to understand. This is very basic of SAP. We will see how the load balancing is done, how the group is being created in the later sessions. So this is just to understand why this diagram is a little bit different here. Because this is quite important for our basis perspective to understand this quite clearly. Next, let us see Java architecture. This also we briefly seen. The Java architecture, we can also have central instance and dialog instance, again depending on the server load. However, the difference is your server process, it's a multi-threaded process, so we need to really analyze how many server process you need. However, The central instance and the dialog instance is identified by the SDM. You can also see the central instance having a Java message server and Java enqueue server. Java message server is again separated uh, from the Java dispatcher. However, this is also available in the central instance. Similar to ABAP system, you can have additional dialog instances which will have the dispatcher and your server processes, and the dispatcher will communicate directly to the Java message server as well as the Java enqueue services. That's a slightly difference here. The dispatcher, each dispatcher will communicate to the Java enqueue server. Also, the each server process will start communicate to the Java enqueue servers. We could also see the server details in our systems. Let's go to our system. Open Internet Explorer. Let me type in the IP address, that is 192.168.1.52 with the port number that is 500. Now you can see the Java application server. You can see the Java application server here. If you simply click the system information, you need to provide the user ID and password for the Java. So let's say j2e_admin. This is the super user for the Java environment, j2e and j2e_admin. This is a default user which will be created during your installation. Now I logged in. Now here you can see all the system detail about the ECC system. You could see the host name as well as the port address for the message server and the port address for the enqueue server and the database. And the database schema name is ECC. This is a host name. That means we installed Oracle as well as the SAP in the same system. And you can see what is the Oracle version, 64-bit version. And you can see the software components. What is the software components running? You have J2E and J2E core, and you can also see the licensing information. This is not yet licensed because this particular system is not licensed. It's used for demo purpose only. Then you can also see the instance. These are all the instance which is running in the systems, and you can also see the OS. It's running on Windows 2003, and it's an AMD processors. That means a normal processor. And you could see the VM information, and you could also see the cluster information. HTTP port, this is also quite important for us. HTTPS port and the P4 port and the telnet port. This is quite important. As a basis consultant, you need to know all these details. Sometimes if you want to diagnose some problems, then you need to know all the details. You could also see the SDM detail, SDM process ID as well as the SDM port. Because these port numbers are quite important if you want to diagnose some issues. If you want to telnet to this specific server, then you need to know this port numbers. The port numbers can differ from one system to another system, so this is the place where you could go and find the detail of the port numbers. Now let us see ABAP as well as Java architecture. This diagram gives you the total overview about the ABAP as well as Java architecture. Here you can see the client SAP GUI. So whenever you log in using SAP GUI, it will go to the dispatcher of ABAP engine. Then it will process, or it will allocate the work process to do the specific task. And you also have the message server which will do the load balancing of the ABAP system. In the same time, if you see the web client using the browser, this request could be a ABAP request, or this could be also a Java request. So depending on the request, the ICM will redirect these requests to ABAP or Java dispatcher. Let's assume this has been dispatched to the Java dispatcher, then Java dispatcher will take control of the particular request and do the necessary process. Moreover, what you could see, the data which is saved in your SAP systems or saved in the ABAP stack, that is in the database of Oracle. However, you also have some specific data which is relevant for J2EE. There could be a little bit doubtful now which database we will call, but the business transaction data, all the data will be saved using ABAP stack to the SAP system, and this could be queried from your Java. However, in Java you could create some temporary table where you could process the specific request more faster. Okay, the connection between ABAP and Java is by connection called JCO, that means Java connector. Java connector actually works on top of RFC. It's similar to RFC. However, Java connector is used to communicate with the Java system. So that's the main difference. Basically, it looks like an RFC connection, but it's a JCO connection where you can use the Java calls to the specific Java server. That's a main difference here. So this is the total architecture of ABAP plus Java stack. So in general, if you see in the SAP system, you can have only ABAP stack, and you can have only Java stack, or you can have ABAP as well as Java stack. The system what we have right now, which we have seen, that's a ECC system which has ABAP as well as Java stack in the same system. This will be far better because you have ABAP and Java in the same system. Then you don't need to communicate, or you don't need to connect these systems separately if you'd like to query the data or you wanted to communicate between the servers. This will be the general setup. However, some customers would like to keep the ABAP and the Java separately for the security reasons, because not all the applications which is running in Java require your ABAP stack. That could be the reason they will keep it separately, or because of maintenance and as well as the performance, you can keep it also separately. With this, we are coming to end of this particular session. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in the next session. Bye bye.